Hello everyone. Back again with film recaps. In this video, I'm going to recap one of the thriller mystery films from 2022, titled God's Crooked Lines. Before we get to the storyline, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and great day. Without further ado, let's get straight to the storyline. The movie opens in 1979, with an old man dropping off a woman named Alice Gould at the entrance of an asylum. Alice enters the building alone, and shows her admission paperwork, revealing that she's here as a patient. The documents bear her husband's signature, and also contain a letter from her family doctor, Donadio. According to Dr. Donadio, Alice is a dangerously skilled liar, and when she's caught in her lies, she spins new ones to cover them up. She is extremely manipulative, and can easily deceive doctors who lack experience. Next, a doctor interviews Alice, who reveals that she's married to a man named Heliodoro, who lives off her money. She describes him as uneducated, whereas she has a degree in chemistry, and currently works as a private detective. Here, we learn that her admission was suggested because she allegedly attempted to poison her husband 3 times, with substances that could not be detected using ordinary tests. But Alice firmly denies this, and insists that it's the other way around, since Heliodoro wants her fortune for himself. She wants to meet the facility's director, Dr. Alvar, but learns that he's on vacation for the next few weeks. Later, Alice is introduced to the facility's deputy director, Dr. Castell, who gives her a brief tour before guiding her through the pre-admission process. While handing over her personal belongings at reception, she requests to keep one of the books she brought, which Dr. Castell agrees to. Later, we see Alice in her cell, where she opens the book they let her keep. Inside are newspaper clippings, and other classified materials about the mysterious death of a former patient named Damien. In a shocking twist, we learn that Alice is not actually crazy, but has been sent here by a man named Dr. Del Olmo to solve his son's murder mystery. The next day, in the cafeteria, Alice meets a patient named Ignacio, who is surprisingly sane in the midst of all the deranged people. While they are talking, Alice is startled by someone attempting to touch her from underneath the table, and it turns out to be a patient named Ojeda, who is a dwarf and extremely perverted. Despite this, a gigantic patient known as the Elephant Man appears to protect the dwarf. Later, we see Ignacio and Alice outside smoking, and she's surprised to see that he has the privilege of carrying a lighter. Her attention is then drawn to strange twins in the distance, accompanied by a young girl. Ignacio explains that the twins, named Romulus and Remo, were born here because their parents were oligophrenic. Remo is mute, while Romulus spends his days mimicking others, and protects the young girl, whom he believes to be his sister. Next, Alice begins to investigate the boy's possible murderer, but when she questions the other patients, their disturbed minds provide little to no insight. She then attends a consultation with a doctor named Arellano, who asks her several questions to evaluate her mental state. He immediately notices her sharp, quick-witted responses, and realizes she is highly intelligent. During the next session, Arellano offers Alice a hot beverage, and gives her the freedom to talk about whatever she wants. But at one point, she deliberately spills the drink on herself and asks to use the bathroom. The doctor is initially hesitant because it's only for staff, but he decides to trust her and gives her the key. Once inside, Alice quickly stuffs her socks with toilet paper, and clogs the toilet, causing the water to overflow and spill into the hallway. Alice urgently alerts one of the staff about an emergency, forcing him to rush out of the archive room to handle the situation. Seizing the moment, she sneaks inside, and searches through the files in the November 24, 1978 folder. That night, as she goes through the stolen documents, she's shocked to learn that Ignacio and Ojeda were allowed to leave the facility on the day of the incident. The next day, Alice meets with Ignacio, and asks him if he left on November 24, which he confirms since his sister was here to visit him. Alice then shows him a letter that says, "You killed him, not me," and she reveals that it was sent to Damien's father on the very day he died. Alice has figured out that the message was written by someone suffering from schizophrenia. She suspects Ignacio is schizophrenic, and questions why he is in the asylum. Just then, a storm approaches, and a nervous Ignacio tries to leave, but Alice stops him, pressing harder for answers. The rain begins to fall heavily, and Ignacio experiences a seizure, and his skin breaks out in painful blisters. Alice is confused, until another patient explains that water is bad for Ignacio. Sometime later, Alice visits Ignacio in the infirmary, where he reveals that he actually suffers from hydrophobia. Alice feels bad for him, and here she reveals that she isn't actually crazy, and she's a private detective sent to investigate the death of Damien. The authorities declared he unalived himself, but Alice believes he was murdered by a former patient of Damien's father, someone seeking revenge. She claims that only Dr. Alvar is aware of her secret investigation, and has granted her permission to live among the patients to solve the case. Upon hearing this, Ignacio reveals that Damian suffered from schizophrenia, and was plagued by hallucinations, which led to him being subjected to electroshock and insulin therapies. He also recalls that the boy had frequent fights with Ojeda, and, in a shocking coincidence, the dwarf was noticeably missing on the day of the tragedy. In the following scene, Alice notices the perverted dwarf harassing another woman before fleeing into the woods. She thus grabs a stick, and heads into the woods to find him. Shortly after, Alice hears a noise coming from the nearby bushes, and cautiously moves to investigate. And then suddenly, Ojeda strikes her head with a stone multiple times until she loses consciousness. Sometime later, Alice wakes up in the infirmary with her hands tied to a stretcher, leaving her confused. Dr. Arellano shockingly reveals that she killed Ojeda, as his body was found lying dead next to her. The news hits Alice like a thunderbolt, as she has no memory of doing it. She recalls the dwarf trying to assault her, and someone else striking him with a stick. But Arellano doesn't believe her, and their conversation is interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Alvar, who has finally returned from his vacation. Next, Alvar removes Alice's restraints, and speaks privately with her. She then begins to explain the most recent updates, and findings from her investigation into Damien's death. However, to her utter shock, Alvar calmly tells her he has no idea what she's talking about. A stunned Alice reminds him about the letters they exchanged, following the instructions of Dr. Del Olmo. But Alvar suddenly denies everything, and coldly states that she's actually crazy, which is why she's here. Upon hearing this, Alice spirals into panic and storms toward the reception, where she desperately tries to call her husband. But Alvar states that they can't contact the outside numbers, and calls for reinforcements. This causes Alice to lash out in rage, and she violently pushes him to the ground. She then tries to run away, but the guards eventually catch her, and Alvar injects her with a sedative, plunging her into unconsciousness. 3 days later, Alice wakes up in her cell, and is visited by Castell, who seems genuinely sympathetic. She pleads to be let go, but Castell claims she can't leave until the medical board gives its approval. Alice then explains her reasons for coming here, and begs Castell to bring her case before the board, where she will explain everything. The scene cuts to the medical board meeting, where Alice recounts her entire story. She explains her husband knew Dr. Del Olmo, and introduced them at a party. The old man then hired her to investigate the death of his son, who died in the asylum. To carry out the mission, Dr. Del Olmo arranged for her admission to the asylum with the help of Alvar, who is actually a friend of his. Alice discreetly had her husband sign the admission forms, and forged a note from Dr. Donadio to convince the authorities of her condition. According to Alice, the old man who dropped her off at the facility was none other than Del Olmo himself. She also confirms that her husband, Heliodoro, has no idea she's here, as she wanted to keep the mission hidden from everyone else. However, Dr. Alvar strongly denies her claims, and insists there was nothing mysterious about Damien's death. He warns her to stop manipulating the doctors and investigating patients, saying her behavior is dangerous both to herself and the others. But Alice confidently states that the truth will be revealed when her husband comes looking for her, and even Dr. Donadio and Del Olmo will support her. Later, the doctors discuss Alice's situation, and she seems to have convinced Castell and Arellano. However, Alvar claims that she's lying and is a very disturbing woman. He recounts that Alice deliberately tried to kill her husband on 3 separate occasions, because she couldn't accept that he was only after her money and never truly loved her. When Heliodoro found out, he chose to institutionalize her with the help of Dr. Donadio, rather than report her to the police. After learning this, Alice's subconscious began to distort her perception of reality, prompting her to create a fake story. The doctors are left confused upon hearing this, and suggest contacting Del Olmo, Heliodoro, or even Dr. Donadio to uncover what is really going on. Sometime later, Alice is summoned to the doctor's office again, where she notices an unfamiliar old man. She assumes he's a police officer, and quickly asks if they managed to contact her husband. However, the doctors inform her that Heliodoro is unavailable, and Dr. Donadio is attending a conference in Zurich. They have sent him a telegram, but received no response yet. This means that Del Olmo is the only person who can verify her story, so Alice urges them to bring him in. But in a shocking revelation, Alvar informs her that the man standing in front of her, whom she assumed was a police officer, is none other than Del Olmo. The old man also looks at her in confusion, and states that he has no idea who she is. This sends Alice into a state of panic, and she insists it's impossible since this is not the man who hired her. She begins screaming and acting hysterically, which prompts the guards to arrive and drag her away. She is then subjected to rigorous procedures like shock therapy, and she's locked inside an isolated cage, which is reserved for the most deranged and violent patients. Inside the cage, Alice experiences a nightmarish vision, where the full truth is finally revealed. She learns that the man pretending to be Del Olmo was actually someone her husband had hired to scam her. Since Heliodoro was only after her money, he deliberately engaged her in the investigation, so she would willingly enter the asylum, only to be trapped there for the rest of her life. When Alice wakes up, she speaks with Dr. Arellano, and tells him that it's all a plot orchestrated by her husband. This shocks him, so he immediately goes to Castell, insisting they must release Alice from the cage. The two doctors visit her together, and Alice explains that Heliodoro planned everything, since only he could have manipulated the newspaper to make the photo of the fake Del Olmo appear before her. She believes he used her money to bribe Dr. Donadio and Dr. Alvar as well. The only way to confirm her theory is to check her bank accounts, and if they're drained, then her theory must be true. Later, we see Arellano arriving at the police station, where he files a complaint stating that one of his patients has been legally kidnapped. Meanwhile, Castell has secretly entered Alvar's office, where she manages to find Alice's documents. But then, she's shocked to discover that Heliodoro paid an unusually high sum of money to have his wife admitted to the facility. Unfortunately, Alvar walks in, so Castell immediately demands to know why Heliodoro paid 20 times more than the usual amount. Alvar states it was merely a donation to the asylum, and that he has never spoken to Heliodoro directly. Castell continues to question him, so a frustrated Alvar fires her for taking Alice out of the cage without his permission. Next, Alvar rushes to see Alice in her cell but finds it empty, so he urgently orders the staff to search for her everywhere. At the police station, Arellano explains the entire situation to the commissioner, and stresses the urgent need to contact Alice's bank. But the commissioner refuses to file a report without the director's permission. Arellano pleads with him, but the commissioner tells him to leave, saying he has some real crimes to investigate. Back in the asylum, it turns out that Alice hides in the workshop. She rallies the patients, telling them she has a daring plan to escape, but she needs their help. She asks Ignacio for his lighter, and waits patiently until the day's end. When night falls, she pours paint thinner all over the workshop, and sets it ablaze. Later, Ignacio watches the flames rising from his room with a tense expression. He deliberately turns on the faucet, and wets his hands before the blisters appear, causing him to let out a pained scream. A guard arrives and rushes to look for a doctor, but he leaves the cell door open. Ignacio seizes the opportunity to leave his cell and quickly unlocks the other inmates' cells, shouting urgently that there is a fire. While the entire asylum descends into chaos, Alice smashes the window of the laundry room, and slips inside to look for clothes. But there, she comes face to face with the Elephant Man, who simply stares at her in silence, forcing her to flee in fear. Later, Ignacio passes by Romulus's room, and is horrified to find him bloodied and lifeless. He tries to help but realizes it's too late, leaving him devastated. The doctors are soon alerted, and the police chief is also summoned to lead the investigation. Meanwhile, Alice has managed to get to the front gate, where she comes across a coroner, who claims she has arrived to examine a dead body. This confuses Alice, who isn't aware of any deaths, but she unlocks the gate anyway. As she is about to walk out, the coroner stops her again, and asks where the male ward and Romulus's cell are. Hearing this, a shocked Alice suddenly changes her mind for some reason, and knocks the coroner out. Later, the hospital staff discovers a woman unconscious in a car, and they're stunned to see her dressed in the patient's clothes. The police chief recognizes her as their coroner, and Alvar's face tightens with the chilling realization that this was all Alice's doing. Soon, the doctors and police find Alice in the examining room with the coroner's clothes, inspecting Romulus's corpse. Alvar immediately orders her arrest, but Alice apologizes for knocking out the coroner, and insists she be allowed to explain her side first. She claims that after studying Romulus's body, she concluded a heavy object or person had likely crushed it, leaving a sunken chest and multiple shattered bones. She shockingly reveals that Romulus's murder was committed by the Elephant Man. It turns out that the man is always like the girl Romulus refers to as his sister and constantly protects. In a shocking twist, she also reveals that it was Romulus who killed Ojeda when he attempted to assault her, which was witnessed by the Elephant Man. Given that Ojeda and the Elephant Man were very close, this situation gave the big guy a deep grudge against Romulus, and he used the chaos to exact his revenge. She also theorizes that the Elephant Man used the glass shards from the laundry room window she had broken earlier as a weapon. When the authorities check the Elephant Man, they indeed find deep cuts from glass shards on his hands, and promptly arrest him for murder. Meanwhile, the police chief is impressed by Alice's sharp intellect, and she introduces herself as a private investigator, detained in the asylum against her will. Alvar tries to deny her claims, but an officer reveals they contacted the central bank, and it turns out her accounts were indeed drained by her husband, confirming her story. The commissioner also believes her, and promises to speak to the judge to see if he can help her. This enrages Alvar, and to make matters worse, Castell hands him a copy of a letter she wrote to the provincial council, urging them to remove him as director. Alvar argues she can't do that since she was fired that afternoon, but Castell counters that her dismissal has not yet been made official in any document. The following day, Alice stands before the medical board to defend herself. Castell reports that Heliodoro is still missing, and he's reported to be somewhere in South Asia. Here, Alice insists that Dr. Donatio's disappearance is no coincidence, as they both plan to declare her insane. Regardless, Alvar is skeptical, and claims that her husband's escape with her money doesn't prove that she didn't attempt to poison him. Now, all board members must vote unanimously to discharge the patient, but Alvar refuses to cast his vote, and instead leaves the decision to the rest of the faculty. With his reputation on the line, he offers to resign with pride, and urges them to withdraw their eviction request, which Castell agrees to. Following this, the board takes a vote, and rules in Alice's favor, proclaiming her sane. This really disappoints Alvar, who comments it is the biggest mistake the board has ever made. But then, before leaving, he drops a final bombshell, revealing that he spoke with Dr. Donatio last night. It turns out that after attending the conference in Zurich, the man took a holiday with his wife, and never really received any of their telegrams. Donatio has firmly affirmed that there is no conspiracy, and has consented to come to the trial. As Alvar exits the room, an old man immediately enters, and he turns out to be the same man who dropped Alice at the facility. He approaches her, and asks her what trouble she's gotten herself into now. Upon seeing him, Alice, who is claimed to be a dangerously skilled liar, and extremely manipulative, stands frozen, and is overwhelmed by paranoia. Okay guys, thanks for watching. See you again in the next video.